so much, Abuna. So, I'm really excited that we're here today, and I'm really excited that we have this series, and I'm even particularly excited that Abuna's here, and that we have the support we're on the same team, we're all doing this together, that there isn't one, side speaking over another. So, one of the reasons I'm excited about this series is because first, we had an intro series before. I think there was an intro talk already to kind of set the stage. And today, we're going to talk about this idea now of healing the mind. When it comes to this subject, I usually think of this. When it comes to health, right? We think of how do you be healthy? Go to the gym. Some people go to the gym more than others. When you go, right, you know those guys that seem to be working a lot on their upper body, but they seem to skip leg day? Anybody see those guys? They have these chicken legs. They're just enormous, massive, refrigerated-looking people, but little tiny, tiny legs. Sometimes in the spiritual life, you can be working so hard on your left bicep. And your left bicep is amazing looking. Wow, look at my prayer life. Wow, look at the way I read about one particular subject. I'm the biggest expert on this one thing. Great, good for you. But that's not the way God explains health to us. That's not the way we understand what it is to be healthy. Right? So what we're not going to do today, we're not going to skip leg day. And leg day, the analogy here is, just like Abuna was saying, health overall, we're talking about your physical health, your spiritual health, your emotional health, the health of your mind. Tried to come up with a hashtag, maybe this will trend later. Right? Minds matter, is because the church teaches us that you're not just a bunch of random collection of parts. You're not an arm and a foot. And, if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, your lung is something wrong with it, say, it's okay, I have another one. Or if you go, I was reviewing actually a true story, someone told me, hey, can you look at my lab work? When you go to the doctor, you do blood work, and they said, hey, can you just take a look? I said, I'm not an expert, but I'll take a look. And I said, this seems like something's wrong with your cholesterol. And they were like, yeah, but my diabetes thing is on point. I'm like, yeah, but that's a different, you need to kind of do both of the things. So far, we're nodding along, makes sense, and that's why we're here, because we understand that we're not just one part, we are a whole person. And the whole person, the church fathers explained to us that it's all connected. It's all related. And that's what we want to look at today, to understand that there isn't one piece we're going to focus on more than the other. A quick recap that I wanted to share with you from last talk is what are the things that you already kind of talked about with Dr. Nabi and Solomon. One, that this is real, this is a thing, this is not a figment of our imagination, right? And two, that it's not always spiritual, and we'll talk about what that means specifically a little bit later. It's common, okay, sometimes, and I know she joked about this too, I've had people servants, older servants come and tell me, Mina, thank God we're people in the church, we're not like the world, we don't have to worry about this stuff. Thank God you don't have to worry about it, but it's there. You should be a little bit more worried about it than you already are, because it's there, and sometimes the things that make us worried, and the things that make us make us concerned, we're not able to identify what's wrong, we're not identify where it's coming from, but it's more related to what we're going to talk about now than it is to just how often we're praying the Egbeya, even though that's an important part. So, not always spiritual, it's common, treatable. Those are some of the things we talked about last time. Sorry. Because it's St. Mary's fast, and because when you take a look together at this and say, somebody asked me last night, I was sharing with them about the clinic that we have that I'll talk to you about in a second, at the Coptic clinic in New Jersey. I said, why is there a need for a Coptic clinic for this subject? And there was one reason, and that one reason is stigma. And when I thought about someone in the Bible or someone in our church history that battled this idea of stigma, or the idea of people talking about you in a way that is unpleasant, I thought about St. Mary. There's this passage in Mark 6 where the Lord Jesus is speaking, and he's doing the regular Lord Jesus things. He's saying something amazing, and people are like, wow, that's inspiring, and that's amazing, and da-da-da-da. And someone responds with this phrase and says, is this not Mary's son? Right? And for us, we think, that sounds like a regular phrase. What's Mary's son? Of course, it's an honor. It's St. Mary. He's the son of St. Mary. I didn't understand the context of this passage until last week at church. There was a group coming from California, and there was a very traditional priest who I love. He's my father's confession. To make them feel welcome, he made every single one of them stand up and say the name of their name, the name of their father. Huh, who is your father? huh, who is your grandfather? To really make them feel at ease, just introduce yourself to the whole congregation individually. So there's like 14-year-old girl is saying, yes, my name, and my father's name is... Why did he ask for their father's name? In the culture of this passage, if you introduce yourself, and the same in Egypt as well, say, my name is so-and-so, I am Mina, Adil, whatever, that's your name. To say to somebody that you are so-and-so and you're Mary's son, it's like, my reaction initially to this was this. What, Abe, how could you say that to Jesus? Mary's son. He's not just Mary's son. You can't just, but why are they saying that? Because there was the stigma that she had, that St. Mary had, and Jesus had his whole life growing up, is like, well, we know he's Mary's son, but we don't really know. The angel didn't speak to us. The angel spoke to somebody else. That's the story. One of the things that always struck me about St. Mary, and what I really want for us together, for a second, to ask for her intercession on this subject, is to battle this, to have her strength. Have her strength that when someone murmurs and says this and says that, she was this powerful, rooted person who would say, no, I don't care about this. I don't care about stigma. I'm above the mainstream, above the stigma, above the nonsense, because I know what's right. And that's what we want to begin for this series, to truly seek her intercession for that. Okay. So, sorry. I'm just trying to, all right, we'll just go by this. Quick survey question. Right now, not you personally, because of course none of us are dealing with this individually, but do you know someone, raise your hand if you know someone, if you have a friend at work or at church or somewhere in your life, you've known someone who has struggled with this issue. Just give me a hand raise. Okay, just take a quick look around the room. It's most of us. And that already tells us something that we're on the subject that is relevant for all of us. Cool. Here is my next pertinent question for us. According to medical literature, according to studies, where is the first place that people go to for help? Do people go to work, school, their family doctor, their mental health practitioner? Where's the number one place? The emergency room. Where do you think would be the number one place? No pressure, okay? No pressure. But the number one place people go to, and this is published clearly, documented in literature, when it comes to mental health issue, is the church. Their faith leader. And they'll come and say, we have this. That's the first place they'll go for help. That makes this, again, this is now, a little bit now, more of like an emergency room. You are the primary responders, both for yourself and for somebody else that you're dealing with. Because when we're talking about this subject, we're going to deal with the whole spectrum of this for a second, of health, right? And you say, if we're looking at another part of health, cardiovascular health, right? Can you say, I'm 100% healthy, I could be healthier, I could work out more, I could eat better? When it comes to our minds, we're all somewhere on this spectrum. We're all saying, even if I'm not in the point of criteria for illness, but things could be a little bit better. I could figure out a way to cope better with things around me, or I could figure out a way to deal with people at work better, relationally, all these things deal with the way that our mind is working. And like we're saying here, the number one place when things go really, really south is the church. Our main conversation today, the main crux of the talk, is going to be how do we treat this? Since I know in the last talk, there was an overview of what it is, what it looks like, how it feels. We're going to dig a little bit deeper today, specifically how is this treated, and why is it treated this way? And I'm going to even share with you some data, because there's national data about what happens when people are treated with depression. But then even I thought a little more exciting is what if we have a subgroup of Coptic people treated, and if we have data on that? We do. So I'm going to share that with you. So I thought that would be relevant. Okay. Before I get into the treatment part, I want to share with you a national study also that was done they asked a group of churches about if you're going to treat this issue with prayer and Bible reading alone, how many people believe that this would be the solution, like this would be the curative answer? So I'm not going to get your particular response, but I'll tell you, here is the answer in the study. This was done by a group called Lifeway, and they study a lot of like issues, but they do a good job of publishing this data. I don't know if this surprises you, but it surprised me, where if you see in the bars, right, it was about 48% of people who identify as evangelicals say then this would be the solution. And then there's even a subset of people who are outside the church who said this would be the solution as well. And then some, disagreed and stuff like that. So sometimes people that come to us and say they've tried to speak to a friend at church, a servant at church, and this was kind of their answer. So I'm hoping, since last talk, we've already kind of agreed that God's approach for us, which we'll talk about in a second as well, is more encompassing than that. It's more comprehensive than that. This is the approach that I want us to think about for a second. When it comes to the medical literature, when it comes to how things are talked about in treatment-wise, this idea, because you're a person who's made up of these many parts, bio, psycho, spiritual, social. Bio, psycho, spiritual, social. For example, if you're talking about something like your spiritual life, like today, we're praying in liturgy. If there's something wrong with you physically, if both your feet all of a sudden are non-functional, it's going to affect the way that you stand to pray, to be able to pray in liturgy. If there's something wrong with you socially, like Abuna with a really great announcement before about holding something in, right? What the Bible teaches about you can't have this interpersonal grudge, you can't approach the altar that way. Similarly now, when we're talking about, could there be a physical, biological part that holds you back from doing something spiritual? And the illustration I wanted to give you, a simple thing. Sometimes people talk about, there's doctors here who are specialists in all kinds of wonderful, wonderful parts. Probably 97% of you are doctors. The other 3% are lawyers or pharmacists. I think those are the allowed things in the church. So, right? I just wanted to pick one organ. Could an organ in your body affect you emotionally? The example here was thyroidism, either hypo or hyper. If this little sucker right here, just a little something in your throat, if it's working too hard, this is what it'll look like. It'll make you anxious. Sometimes you wonder, why am I thinking about something all day, all the time, and I have so much energy and I can't sit still and I'm running around. And you do a little blood test and you show, you know what? This thing is working on overdrive, and here's how we can fix it. We just got to dial it down. Some other people can come and tell you, you know what? I try to stay awake in liturgy and I just keep falling asleep. I don't know if liturgy is boring, but I just can't stay awake. I also can't stay awake at work, but I also can't stay awake when my spouse is speaking to me. That'll get you in trouble. Maybe, again, it's something with a little organ that there's an issue biologically. Oh, here's a medication, 75 micrograms in the morning, and things are way better. But you're looking for a spiritual solution to a biological problem. Make sense? So imagine if you go to your doctor, and your doctor is taking this approach and saying, okay, like for us, I'll tell you, when I'm seeing people who are not in the church, because we're already addressing the biological and the social, I spend more time on the spiritual, because nobody else is spending time on the spiritual. And I say, oh, you used to go to church when you were a kid. That mattered to you. Let's look into that. Versus now, what we have is we're spending a lot of time on the spiritual. We're spending a lot of time on the social. We're spending a lot of time on the interpersonal. If we just spend a little bit more time on the biological, you would be amazed, and I'll show you how much, hopefully you'd be amazed, at the numbers of how much of a difference this can make for us. The impact of our overall functioning. So does the model kind of make sense? The idea here is that I'm not just, like C.S. Lewis would say, you have a body. You are a soul, you have a body. You have a body, like Abuna was saying in the beginning, you have a mind, you have a soul. What the church fathers talk about, you have a nous, which is like the gateway to the soul. All these things are a part of you. And what St. Paul says, again, he makes the illustration, when one member of your body suffers, the whole body suffers. We sometimes talk about that as the body of Christ, but we kind of feel that too, like I was talking with a dentist friend earlier today. If you have a dental issue, Nothing in the world matters more than your dental issue because it's affecting your whole body. It's just one tooth, but like it's excruciating and like you want to kill everyone, and it's affecting your whole function, right? So that's how all those things are related. Okay. I don't want to belabor this point because I think we kind of get it. Maybe I'll skip over this. But the point of, can God heal these things? Of course. But can God cure hunger? Yes. But does that mean our plan for lunch is to gather around and have a prayer meeting? Please, Lord, send tuna sandwiches. We wouldn't do that. Because God would say, I've provided you with tuna sandwiches and Xiaomi pizza and all kinds of amazing things, that you wouldn't have thought to ask for otherwise. There's a quote that I love from one bishop, that God heals and doctors take all the credit. And we really believe that, I think, in the church, is that the healing that's coming, whether it's physical, biological, spiritual, emotional, wherever it is, there's one source of healing, and that's God. If you believe something else, the bottom one, that says, well, if you're sick and you're still sick, pray more. If you're poor and you're still poor, pray more. There's a different theology that we don't subscribe to, a theology of a prosperity, the health and wealth kind of movement, right? I'm sure you guys have heard this before. That's not the way the Orthodox Church looks at healing and wellness, right? But I won't get into that for now. Just to say that we have a different way of looking at healing. There's a beautiful passage in the book of Sirach, which sometimes we don't read because it's deuterocanonical. It's not all in all our books, so we sometimes can miss it. But I wanted to read with you for a second over here. It says, honor the physician with the honor due to him, according to your need for him, for the Lord has created him. For healing comes from the Most High, and he will receive a gift from the king. The Lord created medicines from the earth. This is a good verse to remember, okay? That the Lord created medicines from the earth, and a sensible man will not despise them. He gave skill to man that he might be glorified in his marvelous works. The Lord created medicines from the earth. One of the things that we'll talk about that's maybe some of the most contentious is this idea of medications and where medications come from and what God's perspective is or what the church's perspective is on these things. This is where I want to introduce Abuna MD. This is a new show coming to Fox. Right, you heard of House MD, this is Abuna MD. Right? The same Abuna that gave me communion last week, right? He gave me communion. It was very good follow-through, very good technique. This same Abuna also, on one day of the week, gives prescriptions to Coptic people. And these prescriptions are of the mental health variety. And he's doing this because the bishop urged him to do this. Said, Abuna, please do this, because we need you to do this. Now, if there was something wrong with this, I think his Abuna license would be revoked. I think there are bylaws in the Abuna, like bycodes. You can't give bad stuff to people as an Abuna because that's the role we entrust you to. So if Abuna is giving me communion on Sunday and Zoloft on Wednesday, okay, it must mean that there is some indication sometimes for me to take a medication. And I know this is now, I'm going right into it. This is the heart of things. Because whenever we talk about therapy and stuff and counseling, that's becoming more like, all right, well, let's go to counseling, go to Christian counseling, and you should do that, and that's really important. There's a very strong role for that. But this subject, it's like, oh, hold on now. Don't talk to me about medications and Prozac and these happy pills that the world takes. I'm Christian. True story, one time I was in the hospital. It wasn't about these pills, but we were doing a consult on a lady who refused to take a medication. It was an antibiotic for an infection. I said, ma'am, please take your antibiotic. She said, looked at me dead in the face. She said, Jesus is my antibiotic. I said, wow, that's deep. But I said, maybe, could it be that Jesus created antibiotics, then he wants to give you healing through antibiotics? She said, no. I said, all right, this is going to be a long day. So we had to have a long exchange with this lady, and of course, we wouldn't say that as Coptic people. We wouldn't say that Jesus is my antibiotic. I'm not going to take medication. I'm not going to take medication for, any other part of my organs going wrong, my pancreas, whatever it is. No, Jesus will heal my pancreas. He can heal you of your diabetes, but that will be a way to meet him faster than the rest of us. Like, I'm just giving you a heads up on that, right? Because God has dispensed a way for you to be healed, and it's, again, only from him, but you should not despise. It's like the old classic story. You ever heard that? I don't know if it's real or not, but it sounds believable enough. The guy that was drowning, and he went to the top of his roof, and he said, God, save me from drowning. Like, there was a flood everywhere, right? And then there's a helicopter that comes by. He says, no, I'm waiting for God. There's a boat that comes by, and and then God says, what happened? He said, I was waiting for you. He said, I sent you a helicopter and a boat and, Snapchat. Like, help me. Help me help you. So this center, led by Abuna MD, is a Coptic Orthodox mental health clinic in New Jersey. And the importance of it, one, is the people that it treats, but even more so, I think, what I'm starting to see now in retrospect. This has been 5 years now we've had this clinic open, that Abuna and I have worked on it together. One part of it's helpful is actually treating people. One part is just as a reference point to tell you, hey, this is happening, means approved by the bishop, ran by a priest, and then some doctors run around and do some stuff, but at least all the people we trust are working on this. They approve of it. And there's other things I'll mention just in the same breath. Emba Yusuf in the South started a rehab center. Emba Serapian in LA has a network of referrals for these issues. But I want to share this with you because I'm most closely related to it, and I want to show you some of the things that we've seen so far. Here are some of the things that have been treated in this clinic. I don't know if you can read it, but I'll tell you. Mood disorders, addiction disorders, psychotic disorders, ADHD, personality disorders. So a lot of like the full gambit of things that we can struggle with in mental health. And a lot of these things, I'll tell you, people that we see in the clinic, some are servants, some are, the person that you would see at church and you say, man, why does that person just seem like they're all grouchy, irritable all the time? Maybe it's because there's something going on there, and then once they get it treated, it gets a little bit better. Right? Or people tell me, like, this is one of my favorite phrases. I'm not going to get into every disorder specifically, but they say, oh, this is just my personality. Like, I'm just a worrier. I worry about everything all the time. So, maybe that's not a personality. We're all worried. We're all wound up. We're all stressed out. But maybe we're all stressed out. But also, maybe that stress could be a little better. Because you don't have to be stressed out all the time. Just because you live in a metropolitan city of Northern Virginia or New York City where I live, doesn't mean you have to walk around like chasing your tail. I know they make us think that we do. The next slide is probably the most important. When I told you, if I showed you national data of how effective these things are, it would be sometime maybe 40, 50%. But like I said, the national data will also, there's over 3,000 studies that I didn't put in this PowerPoint that show the effect, the positive effect of being like a church member, of being someone who prays on your health, on your physical health, like you're coming after surgery. If you believe God is punishing you, you have an increase of mortality, like the risk of you dying. And the surgeons could tell this better than I could. More than the rest of us. If you believe God hates you and is punishing you. This was published in, I believe, in one of the prominent journals. I don't have the reference for it right now, but it's true. Versus, if you believe God is on your side and is healing you, and there's a church community and all this stuff, there is a notable, clear difference in your health physically and emotionally and psychologically. So having said that, we're getting people that come to the clinic that have never seen a doctor before because they say, like, Aib and McNoon, I'm not crazy, don't make me see a doctor, they'll come see Abuna. Well, they come see Abuna. And then we see this kind of function. Overall, improvement in function, there's a way, without getting too technical, but there's basically ways that we measure response to treatment in these things. And basically it goes from impairment to functioning. And people, 84% of the time, have some kind of improvement. Or if you saw here, 47% get to like profound improvement. And I'll show you the next slide. They begin with like severe impairment. Some people are like severely impaired. What does impairment look like? Your school, your work, your relationship, like you're on the verge of divorce and you're about to get fired. maybe just take a second look at how things are going inside here. Maybe things are not going so well. And like you're fighting with your friends all the time, and all these things all at the same time, severe impairment, versus now functioning. And how does functioning look? Functioning is how, again, like you're dealing with the people closest to you, your responsibilities around you. So this still blows me away. This is just a snapshot of treatment, but it blows me away because it shows, like, listen, we have an amazing foundation here. Because it's not like you'll take a pill and this will be your answer for everything. No, but because you're already going to Abuna and you're confessing, and you're coming to liturgy and taking the Eucharist, and you're coming to Bible study and learning about the Bible, and all the things, you're doing all the things. And you have a fellowship and Kedonia and like pizza and all those things. Now add to it the one element, you stop skipping leg day, now you have a whole thing going. And that's what we saw. That's what we saw. So now I want to get into this. So what are these magical little pills anyway? Let's just get into this for a second. I'm going to try to explain them in the most simplistic way I know possible. We communicate with each other, you know, right now how like we're sitting here talking, but we're also texting other people, right? We're live tweeting this so all our followers can know what we're doing because they're concerned, right? We communicate via these messages to each other. The brain does the same thing. The brain communicates by messages. It says, it's like traffic control, right? If things are not going well, you kind of look like the picture. Messages are going all over the place. Like, I was going to meet my wife earlier when we left church. Imagine I get one message from her says, go to the parking lot. Another one says, go to the church. Another one says, go to the bathroom. Another one, go to sleep. Like, it's just too many things at the same time. Sometimes this will happen where these little messages in your brain, and again, I apologize for everybody who knows way more about this than I do. The messages in your brain, called neurotransmitters. Neural, brain, transmitters, they transmit stuff. This one thing is saying, hey, feel this way. But this other one is just now overwhelming it with saying too much of this, too much of that. Some of these things, the way these medications work, essentially, is by trying to regulate that traffic a little bit. Maybe one person, there's too much of this one messenger. There's too much of this one text message flooding. I remember reading a report one time that this lady was arrested because she sent her ex-boyfriend like 47,000 text messages. Right? That's a good day for that person. I don't know what's happening there. But that's like an overload of messages. If you're getting one overload of message because of too much of this one messenger in the brain, it'll make you feel a certain way. Or too little of it will make you feel a certain way. The same way with the other ones. Dopamine will make you feel a certain way. If you have too much of it, it'll make you feel a certain way. Too little of it will make you feel a certain way. And the tough thing with our minds is that we feel, or we forget sometimes, that the way you feel emotionally or the way you feel throughout your day can sometimes be related to these little chemical messenger guys. It's not fully explained by it. We're not saying we're reducing ourselves to a bunch of little neural messengers, but it's a part of us. And again, there's good research that can show how these things can also be changed, not just by medications, but also by the things we do, by our prayer habits and so on. So the three main categories I want to share with you, we're not going to get into every medication ever, but the antidepressants, the mood stabilizers, and the neuroleptics. Antidepressants are probably the most commonly prescribed thing, and most of the time they're prescribed by primary care doctors. The second one probably won't be prescribed as much, but I'll tell you, like one person who was visiting today from out of town, it's actually a coincidence I feel maybe from God to remind me to tell you this story. From a different state, he called me one time, he said, hey, we have a situation where a servant in church came to their priest and said, you know, a lot of these really spiritual ideas, but it was a lot of spiritual ideas all at the same time. And God is telling me to sell my business today. Today? Yes. Sell my business today. And then tomorrow, go to a different city and preach the gospel. And this guy's married with kids and all these responsibilities. And the response he got was like, wow, this sounds very spiritual. Like, God bless you. Wow, yeah, that's amazing. And the person who called me who was visiting here today was a doctor. So he called me. He said, Mina, does this sound right? I said, no. Nope. As spiritual as this person is, I don't know him at all. But this is not the way we understand like Orthodox spirituality in general. But there's also very classic of a description for a disorder where it shows itself in mania. And sometimes mania or bipolar disorder all these disorders that we can have, when we get them, we get a spiritual flavor to them. If you get depressed and you're Coptic, you get depressed and you feel more like a Coptic kind of depression. Oh, like I'm down, it's because, I'm unworthy, and you have all these different reasons that you'll reinforce, but the things that you'll be telling yourself are different from the way someone else who's outside the church. They sound more spiritual, and you'll use Bible verses to beat yourself down, and you'll have a patristic, like St. Ephraim the Syrian said, that I should, because you're Coptic, because you're spiritual. Is the problem in St. Ephraim? No. The problem is the way we are functioning. Same with anxiety. I'm so anxious. How can I be anxious? Jesus says, don't be anxious. I'm more anxious now. How can I be worried? Jesus says, don't worry. I'm more worried, etc. And sometimes in this particular situation, I've seen several cases in the church, you'll wonder, why is there someone in the church who seems to be, sometimes they have all the energy in the world, they can do everything, and then they fall off the face of the planet. You don't see them for a while. Sometimes it seems like they're so irritable, like if you look at them the wrong way, they'll explode. Maybe they're just irritable, they have a bad day, or maybe there's something more that's going on in their life. The next question usually happens is, well, what's the risk of taking these medications? Okay? And the thing I want us to try to understand is there is a risk of taking medications in general. The same way there's a risk of taking Advil, there's a risk of taking Tylenol, and there's a risk of not taking these medications. Okay? In medicine in general, they tell you about risk-benefit. I want us to try to remember the fact that right now, I have depression. I was talking to somebody earlier, again, before the talk started, out of town, just to maintain anonymity. They said, hey, my home church, wherever it was, we lost a kid to suicide. It's a real thing, right? A couple of weeks ago, we're doing like a homeless service thing. Homeless. Wait a minute, you're a Coptic. Why are you homeless? Well, I've been homeless 5 years. What's going on? So one of this is going on. It was a mental health issue. I don't take this to be like dramatic, to tell you but this is a reality though. Like, there is a risk that we have, especially if we're talking about suicide. Like every once in a while, this subject of like depression and suicide, because it's so heavy and kind of depressing, I get, we don't want to talk about it, but like some famous guy will do it, Anthony Bourdain, and everyone's like, we got to talk about this. Robin Williams, we got to talk about this. I won't reference other people. Just next subject, change subject. Not in the church. People in the church. Maybe a cleric will attempt suicide. It happens. Then we say we got to talk about it. Because there is a risk of not taking medication. That's the point that I'm trying to make to you. There is a risk of not taking medication. And there is a risk also of taking medication. And like I said here, I won't be able to get into all of them, but I'll tell you there's side effects to these things, but most of the time, because they're so widely prescribed, they're most of the time pretty well tolerated. Let me get into a couple of quick myths real quick, or misunderstandings. One, people will say, well, somebody was telling me this last night, well, I feel like then I'll be depending on them, like they're addictive. And it kind of goes in line with the second one. Like I'll have to be on these medications forever. That's not the way this works. Just good news, like flashing report. These things they're not something you have to be on forever. The indication for a lot of these things is that there's a period, that's the guideline. You would go maybe on a medication for a certain number of months. You're followed closely. How is your function? Are you now going to therapy? Are you feeling better? Let's watch you. But typically, you should not be on a medication like this just one time forever for the rest of your life. That's not the way it works. And secondly, in terms of depending on it or feeling like you're addicted to it, there are a class of medications that are like that, but I would recommend that you avoid them. Xanax, Ativan, stuff like that. Unless it's indicated for what you have going on, not a great thing. But the things that we talked about, the antidepressants, the lithium, Depakote, things like that, generally not an addictive situation. Another one here, they change you. They change you. This is similar to like this dependency thing. They change who you are. In a way that's true because part of how they change you is you're not really being like yourself. When I have someone, I'll give you an example. Like a couple that we saw in the clinic who were saying like young couple and like fighting nonstop. Why are you fighting? We don't know. What are you fighting about? The dumbest things. Okay, maybe there's something here. So one of the persons of the spouse, one spouse, starts on medication. We follow up with them months later. How's it going? I don't know, we haven't fought in a couple months. A couple months? What do you mean? What's the longest you went without fighting before this medication? It was a couple of hours. Again, not to say that the answer to your marriage is medication, but I'm just saying sometimes one of us in a marriage is maybe struggling with depression that's so severe that it makes you irritated at everything that the other person does. And the best target is the closest target. The person who lives with you, it's all your fault. So they take it out on you. So just for all the married people, consider that. So that's the part about changing you. Sometimes it could change you in the sense that it can make you just able to be more like yourself. That's the goal. And we talked about the danger that most of the time these are well tolerated because they're so frequently prescribed. So maybe this could work for you too. I want to just gloss over or at least mention this subject because no matter how, I gave a talk via whatever video to Chicago last week, and no matter how much I talked about and kind of beat this to death, the question at the end was still like, okay, but I don't want to be doing something like not Christian. I want to be holy. Why would I do this? This seems like it's not Christian. In a survey, again by Lifeway, even pastors, like church leaders, 23% of them said they struggled with some kind of mental health issue. One of my favorite little interactions that Jesus had, remember when there was a guy who was sick, and the disciples said to him, this question that we really want to ask about mental health. Who sinned? Whose fault is this? Who do we blame for this mental health thing? Whose fault? And Jesus said, neither. It's not talking about his parents, don't tell me his uncle, because it's not the point. The point of figuring out this idea of health is not, we have to resist our inner, I don't know if it's an Egyptian impulse, to find somebody to blame, find somebody to yell at. What causes these things, like you saw in the last talk? Yes, there is a part of this that's genetic. There is a part of this that's environmental. There's a part of this that's just neurobiological, all these things. But the issue is not who do you blame. Okay? So we talked a little bit about how there's a spiritual overlap for a lot of these things. What I wanted to share with you as well in this study is that they said 75% of the people who felt this experience felt the church was supportive. And right now, I think if I was to ask somebody in the church who's sitting here or hearing this later or whatever, do you feel that the church is supporting you in how you feel? I think they would say, yeah, because they're talking about it. They're not just doing the classic Egyptian approach to problem solving, which is, denial. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. It's like an old dad joke, right? We're all about denial sometimes, but we're not denying it here. We're facing it head on. So this is a beautiful thing that I think would apply to us, that people feel that the church is supportive. I'll skip over a couple things. I want at least to mention the part about substance use, because again, another thing that we're struggling with in the church, whenever we see someone is like somebody again was just telling me this yesterday, like, oh man, did you hear about so-and-so? It's always a great conversation starter. Yes, tell me about so-and-so. They went to rehab. Bad. Again, there's a Coptic rehab in Florida. And whether or not you go to the Coptic rehab, the fact that there is a Coptic rehab means that we as a church are acknowledging that this is, if any of us have confessed a sin more than once to Abuna, there's an element of you that's addicted to a sin. There's no reason for us to look down at somebody else and say, this person's in drugs. بيعمل drugs. We need to be able to support people who are struggling with this because it's again, one of the things that we're seeing. I don't know if I should tell you the story, but there was basically an encounter that we had with a Coptic person who we could have reached out to them, they didn't, and that person later died of an overdose. In the church, these are all church things. I don't know if it's too heavy to say, but it's just true. And the flip side is true too. There are people in the church who struggle with an addiction. The church embraces them. He says, like, we got your back, and spiritual and like reinforcement, and we got you, and we'll help you with rehab. There's one servant who told me a mom called her before she called 911. She said, help me, my kid is using this. And the servant pooled together with other servants. We raised enough money to send him to a particular rehab. That kid's doing well. In the same spirit, like I said before, how the church is this emergency room, first aid, sometimes there's really good outcomes that come from that. So lastly, to wrap up, just a couple of kind of questions. So what do we do? What do we do? We talked about what medications look like. We talked about how some of these things appear. First, there's like Abuna was telling me, he went to something with medicine recently, how we saw how doctors become doctors. The first rule of medicine is do no harm. The first rule for us as the church emergency room is do no harm. Just try not to make it worse. That's a first great goal by not piling it on to people. The second, which we're already kind of doing, be more vocal, have a conversation. Like at dinner yesterday, we were just talking about it a little bit casually, in between talking about like the Knicks and stuff. We're just, because it's okay. That destigmatizes it. That in itself will be that if you're one of the people that have struggled with it but never really talked about it, but it came up at dinner, I'm like, we'll talk about it. The reason I tell you that is because, again, this Lifeway survey, 66% of the people surveyed, and it was thousands of them, said they had never heard about this in church. Never or once. And I usually ask that question. I know at least you've heard about it once because it was a couple weeks ago. But I usually ask that question in churches, Coptic churches. Same response. The overwhelming majority of the church never heard about this, never talked about it in church. So we got to change that. What do we do specifically now? Let's say you're concerned about somebody that you know. This little mnemonic by a group called Mental Health First Aid, which goes like this. You approach, you assess, you assist. Basically, at least if you want to break this down into like Christian terms, be present. Sometimes, as we're getting our coffee, or as we're like doing our thing, we're used to being with people that we want to be with people with. You know what I mean? Like, one time I was in the elevator and I saw somebody and I asked them, hey, how's it going? How's your day? And he said to me, well, my day really depends on the number of people that I have to see in the morning. I said, I was just looking for like a head nod. Like, don't give me, what do you want me to help you? You want me to be present in your life? Right? I didn't say that. I was just trying to. But sometimes that's how we feel with people. If you ask them, like, how are things going in your family? We're just looking for, fine, okay, coffee. So be present with people. Listen non-judgmentally, because we're all struggling. Give support, encourage professional help, and encourage others to support. Sorry, wrapping up. How about this? How do I make a professional, like, how do I make a referral? How do I know, people ask me this a lot of times, like, how do I know if somebody I know should go get help? What if they shouldn't? What if, what's the criteria? I tried to make it as simple as possible with these Ds, these 3 Ds. 1, danger. Are you talking to somebody and they're telling you how hopeless things are and you're starting now to fear for their life? There's a danger element here. What is the danger involved? If the danger is real bad, if the danger is real, then you got to act quickly. 2 is the stress. Like, how is their function? The stress and duty, kind of. How is it affecting their function at work and the places around them? Those are some of the guidelines that they use for maybe now we should get somebody to be evaluated. And here's the kicker. It's okay if you're wrong about this, because diagnosis can be hard. That's why people go to like school for it and stuff. It's okay if you don't nail it. Don't feel like you have to diagnose people the same way that if we know something is not 100% true or not 100% right, we could say, hey man, maybe you need to talk to Abuna. Because there's like a spiritual thing that Abuna has to intervene here and say like whether or not you need something more. Same way when you go to a primary doctor, part of their role is to be able to say, I can help you 100%, or no, you got to go to somebody else. You got to go to a specialist. Specifically, if you want a resource, try to remember this or write it down or something. A simple website called hopeformentalhealth.com. You can search by your zip code for a provider around you. And there's a lot of really great, there's great talks, there's great resources. I even brought like a hard copy, or I'll tell you about that in a second. But this is a very simple website that I would start with, because you can search locally, and we've done this in our area. Another opportunity, if you're looking, you can also call St. Luke's. Our phone number is on here, 949-STLUKE. 949-4 St. Luke. Just touching, well, we talked about this, I'll skip it because we talked about it in a second before. When there is a concern that you have for suicide, tackle that head on, okay? Don't be afraid to use the term. The term is not going to make people want to do it, but it can validate someone that they're like thinking about it. And maybe this is the kind of talk that maybe you hear like once, where you just put in the back of your mind for emergencies, and maybe you can prevent one of these things from happening. Okay? Lastly, if you're concerned about someone and you've tried to do what we said before, the algae one, you approached, you non-judgmental, maybe you also, the role of Abuna here is really important too. By the way, as a side note, the vast majority of referrals that we get in the clinic come from priests, which we're so thankful for, because the priest will get confession and Abuna will say, Habibi, I will pray for you, but also go to the clinic. And when Abuna tells them that, they go. So there's a role of the encouragement of Abuna, there's a role of the encouragement of like servants. I have a patient that the only reason she comes to see me is one of her family members say, house rules, like you either go to the doctor or you can't live here. That's like, it's a kind of intense, but family member support. And then community friend support. But I put this here to say, there is a role, if we're concerned enough, there's a role for 911. There's a role for like the most urgent kind of case where we need the help of like an ambulance to get someone to the hospital. And I got to at least say that just so that we're aware of it, so that it's there. A lot of things, most things never get there, but at least to know that that's a possibility that we need to kind of have an awareness of. I wanted to also give you my information if you have questions individually or if you have questions about a friend. Everybody has a friend. And if you have a friend here, right, and you're concerned about maybe they have depression or anxiety, I brought for you also this simple little questionnaire that you can take with you. It's an evidence-based questionnaire. It's called the PHQ-9 and one called the GAD-7, one for depression, one for anxiety. You can fill it out, get a little score, and if the score tells you, wow, maybe talk to someone, then you should. So I encourage you to come take one of these. I won't even look if you don't want me to. Or if you have questions that you wanted to ask to the group. I know we don't usually do that because people are shy and stuff. But if you wanted to ask questions afterwards, I'm here. Okay? Thank you so much. Glory to God.